the effect on increasing the milliampere, which is the output, or tube milliampere, which is my tube current that I can use in X-ray production. We understood the topic of the space cloud, or the space charge effect, and the Edison effect. All right. The charge effect, or the Edison effect. The focusing cup that I was talking about earlier, which is connected to a negative charge or negative potential, is made of molybdenum because it has a high melting point. This is important because I connect a filament next to it, and the filament heats up through thermal conduction, which could lead to melting and cause problems. Therefore, it must have a high melting point, meaning it melts at very high temperatures. For example, the melting point of the cathode or filament is around 3000 degrees Celsius, and it is made of tungsten. Another important aspect of the focusing cup is that when it heats up, it should not emit electrons, as this would create issues. If it heats up and undergoes thermionic emission, releasing some electrons, it will interfere with the primary electrons already present in the filament. So, it must not have any thermionic emission to avoid interference with the negatively charged electron beam. The reason I apply a negative charge is to focus the electrons towards the anode and stop their spread, as I mentioned, so that the beam is not broad, and thus everything is focused in one spot on the anode. Here is this picture. The text explains the role of the focusing cup and my filament. This is the focusing cup. As if I took a cross section of it, and this is the shape of the electron beam. Now, as I mentioned, I can connect it to a negative potential. For example, 100 or 4000, like here. Or it can be connected to zero potential or whatever. If it is not negative, you will find that there is broadening in the electron beam. Therefore, when it hits the anode, it will not be focused all in one place. The area where the electrons hit the anode is called the focal spot. If the focal spot is broad, it means that the electron beam is wide. However, if the electron beam is narrow, then the focal spot will definitely shrink, as shown here. Now, regarding the filament. There are types of filaments. One is called short filament, and the other is called long filament, meaning the filament that is directed outwards, towards the anode. What is the function of the filament? Its function is to provide electrons. So, if you want to narrow the beam of electrons, should you use a long filament or a short filament? If you are tired, I will continue with you, but I need you to focus a bit because what comes next is important. Here is the anode, and here is my filament. This filament has a specific length from here to there. Here is the electron. The electron beam is here, and this area is what I call the actual focal spot, or my focal spot. It is the area where the interaction occurs between the electrons and my anode. Or in other words, perhaps even, in order to improve the performance and efficiency of our optical system, it is advantageous for us to increase the size of the filament, which in this case refers to the lens, beyond its current dimensions. By doing so, we can expect the beam of light that passes through this lens to also expand in size. This expansion is beneficial for certain applications where a larger beam is required. Conversely, if we decide to reduce the size of the lens, the beam will correspondingly decrease in size. This reduction in beam size will also lead to a decrease in the focal spot size, which can be advantageous in scenarios where precision and focus are critical. Therefore, understanding the relationship between the lens size and the beam characteristics is crucial for optimizing the system's performance. What they call the actual focal spot size is specifically the location of where bombarding takes place between electrons and a node. An effective focal spot is projection that comes from area of actual focal spot itself from a node onto my image receptor, which we refer to as effective focal spot. Now, I have some tubes or some X-ray tubes with short filament and long filament. The short filament is used when I want to achieve a small-sized focal point. Long filament is utilized when aiming for large-sized focus area, meaning region where bombarding occurs on anode will be larger. I have option because small focus point means beam of electrons becomes more concentrated. So resolution quality of image will either increase higher or decrease lower than compared with long filament usage. In case utilizing short filament setup, resulting focused point size remains compact. Thus, electron beam concentration increases further beyond what's achievable through use longer filaments. Does he have an answer? Short filament focus is fine, right? So if you have, for example, an examination that requires high resolution like mammography, do you perhaps expect us to use a short filament or a long filament? If the resolution is high,
families, friends, and close ones.
We need a perfect focus. This point is very, very important. To connect it with the application, you use the small or short filament and you use the long filament. What is their relation to the anode angle? If you look closely, you'll see that the anode angle forms a slope with the line, which is the central line on the central beam itself. This angle is called the anode angle. But why do we even create an anode angle? Why is it drawn at an angle? If you pay attention, why is the anode always depicted at an angle? Does anyone have an explanation?
Because the bombarding electron will affect the components of the anode, and therefore, when the angle is short, the beam will be short, and when the angle is large, the beam will be larger, significantly influencing the overall duration of the process. The components of the bombarding electron will be inside for a long time, so the bombarding electron will come very quickly and in a short period as a result of these interactions. However, indeed, the person who goes inside will take a long time to get out of the anode, so they will have reduced energy. Therefore, they sometimes use it in mammography, which will produce higher energy output, and less energy will be directed towards the eyelid.
Okay, but I think you are talking about the recovery on the anode. Yes. Yes, you are talking about the halo effect and the differences in X-ray coordination from the upper side to the cathode side, right? And the cathode side will be higher than the upper side, okay? You are discussing a different point, but my point now is why the upper side, but my task now is why the anode itself. Subscribe to the channel. You want to set the anode to tilt at this angle. For training the air switch for the girl. Good. What do you want to do with the anode? To facilitate the production, it is easy to determine the direction, whether it is towards a specific point or the opening, so that it can fall accurately and with precision. The question here is about how it is determined, and I am getting. What does the basic meaning of this line mean? The angle of the anode. What happens if I increase or decrease the angle in relation to the focal spot size and the effective focal spot size? As I mentioned, I have something called the actual focal spot size, which is the region where the bombarding or projection occurs. The effective focal spot size is derived from the actual spot size of the beam itself. I need to understand the effect of the anode angle on the actual focal spot size and the effective focal spot size, as well as the impact of filament length, whether it is short or long, on both the actual focal spot size and the effective focal spot size, and where they are used. The filament is short and the filament is short. Focus on both sides. We have effective focus on both sides when you use them. What is their relationship with the tube rating? This means which one of them can handle or withstand high parameters for the machine. For example, if I am working on a case in the CT machine, you should provide high quality and high milliampere. Whenever you have a narrow, focused, and very precise electron beam, the heat loss on the anode is concentrated in a single specific spot, rather than being distributed. Ideally, it should be concentrated in a singular area, meaning that the smaller you make the focused electron beam on a very small, confined area within the anode, the more problematic your thermal distribution becomes. Consequently, the anode will not be able to withstand the extremely high temperature resulting from the collisions that will occur due to this impact. Now, if you use a larger electron beam, what will happen is that the heat will be distributed over a much larger area on the anode, allowing the anode to handle that temperature. In this case, you can perform examinations with very high parameters, such as high kV and high milliampere, like in CT and fluoroscopy, but ultimately at the expense of resolution, because the focusing you achieved was significantly diminished. When you decreased the focusing, you substantially lowered the resolution, but increased the tube rating of the machine, or enhanced the machine's ability to withstand high heat, as you distributed the electron beam over a larger area on the anode. I want to pause here so that you don't feel overwhelmed by the amount of information. I'm not sure what you think about that.
The information is quite significant, as it helps in understanding the context and making informed decisions. It's crucial to consider this carefully to draw the right conclusions and take appropriate actions.
The whole idea is that I don't want to miss out on this information, as it is somewhat important. There are even many questions regarding the line focus principle, the anode angle, and their relationship with the filament length, the tube rating, and the cooling chart, and so on, and their connection to tube rating and cooling, and so forth. So let's take the previous part, and I will prepare the quiz on it, God willing, so that it will be ready for you, for example, this week. God willing, we will study this part well and solve the quiz. I found that only one person solved the last quiz, so I don't know if my explanation is poor or if the message is not reaching the students.
May God grant you health and wellness.
It seems that on Google Forms, it only accepts one way to conduct the quiz because it discusses a lot of information. There is a lot of information in the course, and I am really trying to break everything down and understand it, linking it to your application so that the topic is clear to you. Please, let's just solve the questions. And hopefully, for example, the first case will be for my friends.
Google Forms only accepts submissions in 1 unit.
Excuse me, doctor, it seems that it's not appropriate to choose just one answer. You can select more than one answer if multiple answers are correct.
When I try to select it on Google Forms, it doesn't allow you to choose more than one option. You can only select one, right? No, I don't think so. Sorry.
Okay, I will go back again. So you are the one who solved it correctly, right? I solved it, yes. So your score was almost full marks. There is something more than one answer, Dr. Islam. The doctor's statement is correct that there are questions where you can only choose one answer. I also made a note that her statement is true. Even if there are 2 correct answers, you can only choose one answer for the question.
I will review the Google form again, but I believe, excuse me, doctor, that the exam comes as best or 5, so it's better to have only one answer, so we can imagine the best answer. It might be difficult to have 2, but there should be one correct answer. The exam comes as best or 5, okay? The exam comes with true or false.
He literally wants it to be true or false.
Every sentence you think about can be true or false. It wants to be true or false. It can be true or false. It wants to be true or false. It wants to be true or false. It wants to be true or false. He wants it 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 to be true or...
Well, I am trying to review.
The vacuum is the same.